The Obama administration unveils new measures to further ease restrictions on travel to Cuba, effectively, though not technically, lifting the long-standing ban on Americans visiting Cuba as tourists. The announcement comes 5 days before President Obama is scheduled to visit the country, a first for a sitting U.S. president in nearly 90 years. Here with more details is Wall Street Journal reporter Felicia Schwartz. Felicia, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I know that there were several changes announced today, but the biggest change seems to be that individual Americans can now travel to Cuba and engage in their own so-called people-to-people contact. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so this is one that we've been tracking for a long time. The first time I wrote about it was almost a year ago. But yeah, so essentially anyone can go down and basically certify their travel as legal if they participate in people-to-people exchanges. This is pretty much like going to a privately run restaurant, which are generally more tasty than the state-run ones anyway, going to art galleries, all the kinds of things that people would do, the kinds of things that people are interested in doing when they travel down to Cuba.
So it's pretty easy to do. Now they don't have to go anymore as one of those organizations with pre-sanctioned itineraries. However, they do have to apparently keep a copy of their itinerary, correct? Because technically, pure tourism travel is still not legal, correct?
Yeah, so the law requires that you keep records of your travel for 5 years. I think in practical terms, it's going to be pretty challenging for the U.S. to enforce. We asked some questions to some officials who were briefing us earlier this morning about enforcement, and basically said, we trust Americans to be ambassadors of the kind of change we want to see. So I think that's their way of saying, go down there, talk to people.
Right.
I just, on a practical level, it's very hard to enforce. There was a 50% increase in travel this year, or I guess in the past year since December 17th, 2014. And that number is going to surge even more with commercial flights resuming later this year, with these restrictions further loosened. So in practical terms, you have hundreds of thousands of people going down. It's just going to be hard to enforce.
Right, and we should just mention that probably the only reason the Obama administration hasn't scrapped it altogether is they literally can't do it without a congressional vote, correct?
Yes, exactly. It depends on Congress. And they've renewed their calls again today, as they did earlier this year and in the State of the Union, to lift the embargo.
Absolutely. So clearly this administration has no interest in prosecuting anyone that travels to Cuba. But let's talk a little bit about the rest of it. Now we know that Cuban nationals can become employees of American companies. Is that another change?
So the biggest change, really, there's lots of little things, but the big one is that the Cuban government and Cuba in general has much better access to the dollar. This is something that they haven't. The whole kind of design of the embargo in part was to limit Cuba's access to the dollar in the U.S. financial system, but they've authorized U-turn transactions and done some other things that gives Cuba a lot more access to the dollar. This is something they really wanted. And it definitely makes Cuba able to interact much more widely in the global financial marketplace than they were before.
And how do these new rules affect U.S. banks looking to establish a presence in Cuba?
So that's a good question. I think it definitely allows them to move dollars more easily. I think I'm definitely still looking at the regs. I've been talking to lawyers this morning. I just want to hold off on saying anything definitive before I fully understand them. But there was another reg that allowed, I think almost a year ago, that allowed for banks to set up correspondent accounts. I think this allows for more of that.
Right.
And dollars should move more easily, more quickly, less steps in between. But
well,
let's see where it goes.
If it's true, as I hear, that there are no rooms in the hotels in Cuba now, I'm sure that's not going to ease up anytime soon with these new announcements. Felicia, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.